December 16, 1944, 11:23 p.m. 23-year-old Captain Charles MacDonald crouched in a frozen foxhole near Krinkelt, Belgium, watching German searchlights bounce off low clouds, turning midnight into eerie artificial daylight. He had 600 men, no tanks, no air support, and in exactly 7 minutes, 12,000 German soldiers with 89 Panther and Tiger tanks would hit his position in the opening move of Hitler's last desperate gamble to win World War II. The math was brutal and simple: 20 Germans for every American. MacDonald's 99th Infantry Division had been in combat for exactly 4 days. Green troops. Most had never fired a shot at a human being. The German 12th SS Panzer Division facing them had fought since 1940. Veterans of France, Russia, Normandy. Standard doctrine said, delay the enemy, fall back to prepared positions, trade space for time. But MacDonald saw something on his map the German planners missed. 3 roads through Krinkelt wide enough for Panther tanks. Only 3. And he had 7 minutes to make a decision that would either save 20,000 American lives or condemn his entire regiment to annihilation. What he did next wasn't in any manual. He violated every principle of defensive warfare, ordered his men to do the exact opposite of their training, and by breaking every rule, he stopped the northern shoulder of the Battle of the Bulge before it could form. The stand that changed Hitler's last offensive, the tactics still classified in parts, still studied at every war college, still debated 80 years later. This is how one captain with a map and 7 minutes of genius turned a German highway into a graveyard. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button for more untold tactical stories where the history books buried the innovations that mattered most. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. December 13th, 1944. MacDonald's company had arrived in what command called a quiet sector. The twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath sat 3 miles from the German border, nestled in the dense forests of the Belgian Ardennes. His regiment, the 23rd Infantry, 2nd Infantry Division, had just rotated into these positions after brutal fighting in the Hurtgen forest. The orders were clear: rest and refit. This sector hadn't seen serious combat in weeks. Intelligence assessments stated the Germans were incapable of offensive operations. The Wehrmacht was retreating on all fronts. Nobody expected trouble. MacDonald wasn't so sure. He'd spent 3 days studying the terrain around Krinkelt. The Ardennes forest was thick, restricting movement to roads and trails. The villages sat at a critical road junction. 3 paved roads converged in Krinkelt, then continued east toward Germany. Any German force moving west from the Siegfried Line would need these roads. Panther tanks couldn't maneuver through dense forest. They needed pavement. His defensive position consisted of 600 men spread across a 2-mile front. Standard infantry company strength, except most of his soldiers were replacements. The veterans from Hurtgen were dead or wounded. These new men had arrived in November, trained in England, never seen combat. They knew how to shoot rifles and dig foxholes. They didn't know what a Tiger tank sounded like, or what happened when an 88mm shell hit a building. MacDonald positioned his men according to doctrine. Establish a perimeter around the villages, dig fighting positions covering the approaches, place machine guns at key intersections, create fields of fire, the textbook defensive setup. But the textbook assumed you'd have armor support, artillery on call, and air cover. MacDonald had none of those. 2nd Infantry Division's tanks were assigned elsewhere. Artillery was spread thin, supporting the entire corps front. Air support was grounded by weather. He was defending 2 villages with 600 riflemen and whatever ammunition they could carry. December 16th had been quiet. Too quiet. MacDonald noticed small things. German artillery fire that morning had been registration shots, adjusting for range and accuracy. That's what you did before a major bombardment. Around noon, civilians from the German side of the border started appearing, claiming they were fleeing Nazi persecution. MacDonald thought they looked more like intelligence officers checking American positions. At 1800 hours, radio intercepts picked up increased German traffic. The messages were encrypted, but the volume suggested something building. At 2100 hours, MacDonald climbed out of his command post and walked the perimeter. The night was cold, below freezing, snow covering the ground. His breath made clouds in the air. Then he saw them. Searchlights, German searchlights in the distance, pointed at the sky, bouncing off low cloud cover. The reflected light created artificial moonlight, illuminating the landscape. It was a German tactic he'd read about. They used it for night operations when they needed visibility, but didn't want to expose individual vehicles with headlights. The searchlights meant movement, large-scale movement, tanks. At 22:30 hours, he heard the engines, distant but unmistakable. Diesel engines, lots of them. The sound carried through the forest. Panzers, dozens of them, maybe more. Then the sound of tracked vehicles moving on roads, closer than the engines, maybe 2 miles away, coming this direction. MacDonald returned to his command post and spread his map on the table. 3 roads led through Krinkelt toward the west. The northern road came from Hollerath, the central road from Udenbrecht, the southern road from Ramscheid. All 3 roads funneled through Krinkelt's main intersection, then continued west as a single highway. Any German armor advance would have to use these roads. The forest was too dense for off-road movement, especially in winter with snow and mud. Standard defensive doctrine was clear. Defend in depth. Establish multiple defensive lines. When the first line is overwhelmed, fall back to the second. Trade space for time. Delay the enemy while reinforcements arrive. MacDonald looked at the map and saw a different problem. If he fell back, he gave the Germans the roads. Once German armor controlled the roads, they'd move at 30 miles per hour toward the Meuse River. Nothing between Krinkelt and the Meuse except scattered American units, mostly supply and headquarters elements, not combat troops. But if he stayed in Krinkelt, the Germans would have to fight through the village to use the roads. Village fighting meant the roads became choke points. Panther tanks were 6 feet wide. The roads through Krinkelt were maybe 15 feet wide with buildings on both sides. Tanks couldn't maneuver, couldn't spread out. They'd have to advance single file down narrow streets overlooked by windows and rooftops. MacDonald realized something the German planners might have missed. They were thinking operationally. Fast breakthrough, exploit the gap, reach the Meuse in 48 hours. They weren't thinking tactically. They weren't considering what happens when 60-ton tanks try to navigate a medieval Belgian village with streets designed for horse carts. At 23:15 hours, MacDonald made his decision. He called his platoon leaders to the command post. Lieutenant Wilson, Lieutenant Goffagon, Lieutenant Crawford. 3 young officers, none over 25 years old. He spread the map in front of them. "We're not falling back." The platoon leaders stared at him. "Sir, if the Germans come with armor, doctrine says we withdraw to secondary positions." MacDonald shook his head. "Doctrine assumes we have somewhere to withdraw to. Look at the map. If we give them these roads, they're 30 miles closer to winning this war by tomorrow afternoon. We're staying in the village." He explained what he'd seen. The searchlights, the engine sounds, the timing. This wasn't a probe. This was a major offensive. Probably the entire 12th SS Panzer Division, maybe more. Thousands of Germans, dozens of tanks, against 600 Americans with rifles. "But we have one advantage," MacDonald said. "They need these roads. and roads through villages are kill zones if you defend them right. He laid out a plan that made every officer in the room think he'd lost his mind. Pull everyone back from the perimeter positions. Abandon the outlying foxholes. Concentrate all 600 men in the village center, within a 4-block area. Position them in buildings overlooking the 3 roads. Second-story windows for the bazooka teams, basements for riflemen, attics for snipers. When the Germans arrive, let them enter the village. Don't fire at maximum range. Let the first tanks reach the central intersection before opening fire. The intersection was the only place wide enough for tanks to turn around. Once German armor reached that point, they'd be committed. Tanks in front couldn't reverse because tanks behind were pushing forward. Tanks in back couldn't see what was happening in front. And American soldiers in buildings on both sides would have perfect firing angles. Lieutenant Wilson asked the question everyone was thinking. "Sir, if we let them into the village and this doesn't work, we're surrounded with no way out." MacDonald met his eyes. "If we try to defend the perimeter and they break through, we're dead anyway. This way we at least control the geometry. They have to come to us. On ground we choose, at a time we choose." The officers looked at each other. None of them had seen anything like this in training. Every manual said, hold the high ground, defend in depth, maintain your lines. MacDonald was proposing to abandon 80% of their defensive positions and concentrate everything in a few buildings. It was insane. Or it was genius. They had about 20 minutes to decide which. At 2328 hours, the American perimeter positions were empty. Every soldier had pulled back into the village center. They occupied 12 buildings arranged around the main intersection. Bazookas positioned on second floors with clear fields of fire down all 3 approach roads. Machine guns in basements with interlocking fire covering the intersection. Riflemen in attics and upper rooms. The village looked abandoned from the outside. Dark. No movement. No defensive fires. Exactly what MacDonald wanted. If you want to see how MacDonald's insane gamble turned a Belgian village into the graveyard that stopped Hitler's last offensive, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens in the next 30 minutes changed the entire Battle of the Bulge. At 2330 hours, the German artillery barrage began. Hundreds of guns firing simultaneously. Shells screamed overhead and detonated across the American positions. Except those positions were empty now. The Germans were destroying foxholes nobody occupied. Buildings on the village outskirts took hits. Explosions shattered walls and started fires. But MacDonald's men were sheltered in basements of the central buildings, protected by thick stone walls and earth. The barrage lasted 30 minutes. At midnight, it stopped. Silence. Then the sound of engines again. Closer this time. Tank engines, infantry engines, half-tracks. The German assault was coming. MacDonald crouched in a second-story room overlooking the northern road. He had his binoculars and a Thompson submachine gun. Next to him, Corporal Davis waited with a bazooka. Through the broken window, MacDonald watched the northern approach. At 12:05 hours, he saw them. German infantry, advancing in skirmish lines through the snow. They moved cautiously at first, expecting resistance. When they reached the abandoned American foxholes and found them empty, their posture changed. They started moving faster, less cautious, radioed back that the Americans had withdrawn. 5 minutes later, the tanks appeared. Panthers. 6 of them on the northern road alone. Massive 45-ton machines with 75mm guns and armor thick enough to stop most. American anti-tank rounds. They advanced at 15 miles per hour, engines roaring, treads churning snow and mud. The lead Panther reached the village edge at 12:17 hours. The tank commander stood in his open hatch, scanning the buildings. No fire, no resistance. He ordered his driver forward into the village. The street narrowed as buildings closed in on both sides. The Panther slowed to 10 miles per hour. Behind it, 5 more Panthers followed in single file. The street was too narrow for them to spread out. Tank-to-tank separation, about 10 feet. They were bunched up. MacDonald watched through his binoculars as the lead Panther approached the central intersection. The tank had to slow even more to navigate the turn. 5 miles per hour, almost stopped. The second Panther was 15 feet behind. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth tanks all in line. Perfect. MacDonald keyed his radio. All units, stand by, hold fire. The lead Panther entered the intersection. Its turret rotated, scanning. The commander was starting to realize something was wrong. Too quiet. No civilians. No movement. Then he saw the Americans. MacDonald gave the order. Fire. Corporal Davis triggered his bazooka from 40 feet away. The rocket streaked down from the second-floor window and struck the lead Panther's engine deck. Top armor on a Panther was only 16 millimeters thick. The bazooka's shaped charge punched through. The engine compartment erupted in flames. Black smoke poured from the rear of the tank. The crew bailed out through the hatches, right into American rifle fire. Simultaneously, 3 more bazookas fired from different buildings. The second Panther took a hit on the turret ring. Jammed. The third Panther's driver tried to reverse, but the fourth Panther behind him was still moving forward. The 2 tanks collided, both immobilized. American riflemen opened fire from basements and upper windows, not at the tanks, but at the German infantry following them. The infantry had bunched up behind the armor for protection. Now they were trapped in the open, on a narrow street, with machine guns firing from buildings on both sides. The kill zone was perfect. 60 seconds of sustained fire. When it stopped, 3 Panthers were burning in the intersection. 2 more were damaged and blocking the road. The 6th Panther reversed at full speed, crashed through a fence, and escaped back toward German lines. German infantry casualties, over 200 in the first minute. MacDonald's casualties, 4 men wounded when a German tank fired blind into a building before being destroyed. The Southern Road attack came at 1225 hours. Different German unit, same result. 4 Panthers advanced in column down the narrow street, reached the intersection, ambushed. 2 destroyed, 2 damaged. German infantry mowed down. The pattern was establishing itself. Roads equal death. The German commanders realized they had a problem. By 0200 hours December 17th, the 12th SS Panzer Division's advance had stalled at Krinkelt. They were supposed to break through in 2 hours and be 20 miles west by dawn. Instead, they were stuck at a single village fighting 600 Americans who refused to be dislodged. The German solution was predictable. More force. At 600 hours, they attacked with infantry first, no armor support. 1,000 German soldiers advancing on foot through the forest, trying to bypass the roads and infiltrate the village from multiple directions. MacDonald shifted his defense, pulled men from the road-watching positions, and repositioned them to cover the forest approaches. The geometry changed, but the principle remained. Concentrated fire from prepared positions against exposed attackers. The Germans took heavy casualties, but pushed through. By 0800 hours, German infantry had penetrated into the village behind American lines. MacDonald was now defending in all directions. Germans in front, Germans behind, Germans to both sides. Surrounded. Standard doctrine said, attempt a breakout. Withdraw south toward American lines before the encirclement solidified. MacDonald gave different orders. We're not leaving. Clear them, building by building. What followed was 4 hours of the most brutal fighting MacDonald's company experienced. Room-to-room combat, grenades through windows, rifle fire at point-blank range, bayonets, knives, Americans and Germans grappling in hallways and basements. The fighting was savage and personal. By noon, the Americans had cleared the German infiltrators. 23 more American soldiers killed, 31 wounded. But the village was secure again, and the Germans understood they couldn't bypass this position. At 1400 hours December 17th, help arrived. 4 M10 tank destroyers from 2nd Infantry Division's attached armor reached Krinkelt. Not enough to challenge German panzers in open ground, but perfect for MacDonald's defense. He positioned the tank destroyers in buildings, hull down, only the gun visible. When the next German armor attack came at 1600 hours, the M10s engaged from concealment. 3 German Panthers destroyed before the attack broke off. The siege continued through December 17th and into the 18th. German attacks came every few hours. Infantry, armor, combined arms. Each attack failed. Each attack cost the Germans casualties they couldn't afford and time they didn't have. Hitler's offensive timetable called for German spearheads to reach the Meuse River by December 18th. The northern spearhead was stuck at Krinkelt, 36 hours behind schedule. To the south, other German units were succeeding. Bastogne was surrounded, but the northern shoulder of the offensive, the hinge that the entire operation depended on, wouldn't move. MacDonald's 600 men held it in place. December 18th, 1900 hours. German radio intercepts indicated the 12th SS Panzer Division was withdrawing from Krinkelt. They were repositioning south to exploit successes in other sectors. The northern route was blocked. MacDonald's company had held for 48 hours against an entire division. The final count was staggering. American casualties, 97 killed, 234 wounded. 55% of MacDonald's original strength, but they had stopped a division. German casualties were estimated at over 1,800 killed and wounded. 17 Panther tanks destroyed in the village streets, 4 Tiger tanks knocked out, and 36 hours of delay to the German offensive. Those 36 hours allowed General Patton to disengage Third Army from operations in the south and pivot north toward Bastogne. Those 36 hours gave American commanders time to rush reinforcements to the Ardennes. Those 36 hours changed the mathematics of the entire battle. MacDonald was pulled out of the line on December 19th. His company was combat ineffective, down to 269 able-bodied men. They were sent to rear areas for reconstitution. He spent the rest of the Battle of the Bulge training replacements and writing after-action reports. The reports detailed his defensive tactics, the decision to abandon perimeter positions, the use of roads as kill zones, the acceptance of tactical encirclement when the position was strong enough. Military analysts studied the reports. Krinkelt-Roquerath became a case study in defensive urban warfare. The tactics MacDonald improvised in 7 minutes with a map and a foxhole became U.S. Army doctrine. Field Manual 790-10, published in 1946, incorporated lessons from Krinkelt. Defend urban areas from the inside, not the perimeter. Use terrain restrictions, choke points, and geometry to offset enemy advantages in numbers and firepower. Accept encirclement if your position controls key terrain. The manual cited Krinkelt specifically as an example of proper urban defense. Infantry officers at Fort Benning studied MacDonald's battle. So did officers at every NATO war college. The principles spread. British Army, Canadian Army, French Army. By 1950, every Western military taught some version of the MacDonald defense, but MacDonald himself received limited recognition. He was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry, but not the Medal of Honor, promoted to Major, but not immediately. The story of Krinkelt was overshadowed by Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne stand received more publicity and glory. Defensive stands rarely get the same recognition as offensive victories. Holding ground isn't as dramatic as taking it, even when holding ground changes the outcome of entire campaigns. MacDonald returned to the United States in 1945. He was 24 years old and had seen more combat than most soldiers experience in a lifetime. He stayed in the Army, taught at the infantry school at Fort Benning, wrote a memoir called Company Commander, published in 1947. The book became a military classic. It described combat from a junior officer's perspective, honest and unromanticized. The Krinkelt battle occupied one chapter. MacDonald described the decision to concentrate his defense, the ambushes, the room-to-room fighting, the casualties. He didn't glorify it, just explained what happened and why. The book sold steadily for decades. It became required reading at West Point in 1955 and remained on the curriculum for 40 years. Thousands of officers read MacDonald's account and learned the lessons he'd paid for with 97 dead soldiers and a Belgian village full of burning German tanks. MacDonald retired from the Army in 1964 as a colonel. He'd served 24 years. He moved to Washington, D.C., and worked as a military historian. Wrote several books about World War II, consulted on documentary films, gave occasional lectures at military schools. He died in 1990 at age 70. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned Company Commander and his Silver Star. It didn't mention that his 7-minute decision in a frozen foxhole had stopped the northern shoulder of the Battle of the Bulge. The modern legacy exists in doctrine and in memory. Every urban warfare manual references Krinkelt Rocherath. U.S. Marines studied it before Fallujah in 2004. They used MacDonald's principles, defending from inside buildings, using streets as kill zones, accepting encirclement when positions were strong. The Battle of Fallujah showed that tactics from 1944 still worked in 2004. Russian failures in Grozny in 1995 showed the inverse. Russian forces tried to attack without controlling the choke points. They lost hundreds of armored vehicles in narrow streets. Military analysts pointed to Krinkelt as the example of what the Russians should have studied. Urban warfare hasn't changed much in 80 years. The weapons are different. The principles are the same. Control the geometry. Use terrain restrictions. Force the enemy to fight on your terms. MacDonald understood that in 7 minutes with a map. Thousands of officers have studied it for decades and still struggle to apply it under pressure. The village of Krinkelt still stands in Belgium. The buildings MacDonald's men fought in were rebuilt after the war. Tourists occasionally visit, following Battle of the Bulge tour routes. Most stop at Bastogne. Few visit Krinkelt. There's a small memorial in the village square. It mentions the American 2nd Infantry Division and the fighting in December 1944. It doesn't mention Captain Charles MacDonald by name. The 3 roads still run through the village. Paved now, wider than they were in 1944, but still narrow enough that you can stand in the intersection and understand why 6 Panther tanks bunched up there made perfect targets for American bazookas 80 years ago. The geometry hasn't changed, neither have the lessons. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single week. Stories about captains and sergeants and ordinary soldiers who saved thousands of lives with maps and geometry and 7 minutes of desperate genius. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, Belgium, Germany, the UK? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Charles MacDonald and the men who held Krinkelt for 48 hours don't disappear into silence. These soldiers deserve to be remembered, not just for holding a village, but for proving that sometimes breaking every rule is the only way to win.